Hello and welcome to another episode of Search Off the Record, a podcast coming to you from the Google Search team, discussing all things search and having some fun along the way. My name is Martin and I'm joined today by John from the Search Relations team, of which I'm also part of. Hi, John.
Hi, Martin.
And we have a special guest, Allan Scott from the Dupes team. Hi, Allan.
Dupes?
Dupes. Dupes.
Internally, we call it Dupes, but okay.
Oh, I'm not a native English speaker. For me, it's Dupes. Okay, so you're like the Dupes.
You're actually
Dupes.
right. We spell it wrong. We put D-U-P-S, and so everyone outside should think it's Dupes, but for some reason, we've always called it Dupes.
But I think externally we call it canonicalization. So,
which is even worse.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
I've been fighting that terminology for years.
Oh, really? Okay, before we get into that, would you be so kind to introduce yourself to our audience?
Of course. So my name is Allan Scott. I'm some software engineer at Google. I've been here over 12 years now, I think, and I have spent almost all of that time working on the problem of duplicate detection and elimination, which wraps into other fun problems like signal forwarding, and these days even starts pulling in other wilder topics from the fringes like error pages and localization. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. So we've started this off with me mispronouncing dupes, and you telling us that when externally we talk about canonicalization, you really don't like that. Why don't you like the term canonicalization?
To be fair, that's something that I go up against usually more internally, because when people think canonicalization, they sort of imagine this one black box that does all the magic things together. And it's very difficult to handle requests from people that are like, well, why is canonicalization wrong? And so I tend to push people to think of it as, well, canonicalization is one step. I have a bunch of URLs and I want to know which of them is the canonical. But there are other steps that are as, if not more important here, like the first one being clustering.
Oh.
Usually when people come to us and complain about canonicalization, the immediate thing we say is, oh, that's a clustering problem because these two pages shouldn't be in the same cluster, let alone cases of canonical selection. Like, if you want to bring a canonicalization problem to me, what that is these two pages are in the same cluster, but they aren't actually, like, we picked the wrong one. Like the most dire case being a hijacking. We see those and we act really fast because those are just disasters.
Ooh.
So clustering is basically taking the pages that we think are the same, and then canonicalization is from those pages, which one is the best one? Is that about right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, rel canonical is a bit of a magic factor that crosses both these lines. Rel canonical will first try to put two pages in the same cluster. It may or may not succeed, but if two pages are in the same cluster and there is a rel canonical between them, then it's also a canonical selection signal.
Oh. So you say it's a canonical selection signal. Does that mean that there's other things that could be a signal for canonicalization?
I'm not sure what the exact number is right now because it goes up and down, but I suspect it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40.
Wow.
Okay. Well, now our listeners will be making spreadsheets with 40 signals, like they used to do with those 200 ranking signals that we had.
But I think if I remember correctly, HTTP versus HTTPS is one of them?
Yes, there's actually multiple criteria that try to deal with that dimension in specific, because we want to get that right, but it's not as easy as it might seem. The general guiding principle we have is we want to sort of what you see is what you get for the end user, where if we give them an HTTPS page, then it should actually be secure. Whereas if we don't think it's secure, they should get an HTTP page. That means that sometimes we follow the webmaster signals and sometimes we don't, because webmasters might do things like, hey, my HTTPS page redirects to my HTTP page and then to a different HTTPS page. That's not secure.
Mm-hmm.
So that will get you pushed to an HTTP canonical if we can manage it.
Interesting.
I guess the issue of multiple steps of redirects, that's that's challenging in general, right? Or
Yeah,
it's like finding which one is the right one to show, or which one is maybe something tied to personalization or the location of the user.
it's funny, actually. This all kind of links together here because we just came off HTTP versus HTTPS, and now we're talking redirects. Just recently, I made an effort to sack one of our criteria. I'll give away the name. It was called redirect to shorter. And it had a really bad interaction with HTTP HTTPS because if you had conflicting signals come from the webmaster, this one would push you to HTTP.
Oh.
So we wanted to get rid of it for the longest time.
Oh, that extra letter.
Yeah, literally just that extra letter. This is why I like, go ahead, make your spreadsheets. Some of these criterion are not very smart. Some of them are very tricky, but some of them are also very, very basic heuristics.
Oh my. Okay, wow. But why do we even need like 40 plus minus X signals? I mean, website owners never make mistakes and give you the correct canonical all the time, right?
So when it comes to trying to figure out how to weight things, one of our biggest problems is we don't know what to do when Webmaster sends us conflicting signals. The two most common that come up there would be 301 versus rel canonical. Like those are both very strong signals. If your signals conflict with each other, what's going to happen is the system will start falling back on lesser signals. So it'll start listening to things like sitemaps or PageRank or the now deceased redirect to shorter.
Okay, so if you have conflicting strong signals, then basically you're saying these don't matter.
We just don't know how to train the system in those cases because, like, how does a human evaluate that? At the end of the day, we can only train the system as well as a human can evaluate what the correct answer is. And we just don't know once webmasters start giving us confusing signals like that.
I guess, you can't train a system to just sit in a corner and cry. Because that's what a human would do in that case.
Yeah, we train the system to be ambivalent.
Okay, at least that. All right. So we've heard about redirects, we've heard about clustering, and that actually, the clustering bit reminds me of something that keeps coming up. And I think this got a little worse since Google Search Console started primarily reporting only on canonical URLs.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when you have a website that is in 3 regions that have near duplicates. So let's say Germany and Switzerland both use German,
mm-hmm.
and High German at that in text and in written content. And then you have like a product page, and it's pretty much the exact same information, except the price and the currency are different. And website owners make a huge effort of like making sure that they tell us, oh, so this is the version for the Swiss market, this is the version for the German market. So like they use hreflang and all these lovely things that we have. And yet one of these gets chosen as the canonical and shown in reports. And then also this canonical sometimes changes. It makes things interesting. Let's put it that way. How does that work? But I think it also plays into the clustering bit, right? If you tell us that it's kind of the same but different language versions, is that part of a cluster then?
This would be the localization iceberg that we're now encountering. You can see the tiny sliver above the water line, and then there's this giant mass underneath. If this topic seems confusing externally, it's also confusing internally. We have been trying to make localization work in a reasonable way for a very long time, because it's a very challenging subject. So you're asking about how clustering works with localization. Well, the answer is it depends.
Oh, people love that. Externally, people love when you say it depends.
Yeah, so internally, there's essentially 2 categories of localization types. There are the localization types where it's just a boilerplate translation, which is something you see very common, especially with big social media sites. They don't translate the content. Whereas there are also translations that are full translations, where you will see the actual content of the page fully change.
Yeah, and I mean, the boilerplate bit is pretty pointless, right?
I mean, yes, largely speaking, it does not help a lot for people to see, hey, this is the Swedish version of your favorite celebrity's social media feed. That is not something that we're really concerned with doling out for people. But the full translation pages should not cluster. because they have different tokens they're going to retrieve for different queries. So we don't want them in the same cluster. We want to have all those pages available for retrieval. The boilerplate translations we want to put into the same cluster. And that means that they'll consolidate signals, but it also means that we don't have to crawl every single localization variant, because to be honest, we're wasting your bandwidth and we're wasting our space by doing that. So that's why it depends. There's two different ways we want to handle these things, and which one you're doing matters. And then you get the really complicated ones, like what you said, where they just changed the price, and those ones become more complicated because it's basically the same content but for one token, but that one token really matters. And in that one token case, we still want to have them in different clusters. That's a more challenging problem in theory than not putting two language variants in the same cluster, but that's why localization is a hard space.
In the case of boilerplate translations, would we still try to swap out the URLs when we show them in search, or?
Oh, absolutely. So sitting on top of all of this talk about clustering, which is the Dupes system on its own, there's hreflang, which is basically a separate system where if you put in the annotations, we will try to substitute them. John knows that there is a project right now which may or may not be live by the end of the year that is attempting to increase the reach of that specifically. So we want to serve more hreflang variants. We want to utilize that more, but we need to put in place mechanisms that will determine basically how much we can trust it on a given site. So we're doing some crawl and verification basically to determine, is this site serving its map correctly? And if so, then we're going to try to serve that more often without necessarily having to verify it as much as we currently do.
Okay. I guess that would also work for the Swiss and the German versions.
Hopefully, yes. I'm not super familiar on the specifics between, German and Swiss German, but if there are minor differences, then I would expect this to be able to say, oh, you're from Switzerland, and there's an hreflang entry for Swiss German, so here you go. This is the right page for you.
Cool.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah. That sounds interesting. And with Xdefault, do you find that's something that sites generally use correctly? Or it always feels tricky to explain that, because by the time you get to that, it's like their head already blows up from all of the hreflang.
So Martin was asking me about canonicalization signals earlier. Xdefault is actually a signal and a not inconsequential one. I don't know that it is used very commonly. It does seem to be used reasonably well when it is used. I kind of wish people would use it a bit more. To put this in perspective, you've kind of got two tools here. One of them is rel canonical, which says, hey, I'm supposed to be clustered with this other page, and that other one is supposed to be canonical. Xdefault is more of a, hey, if you don't know what locale to do, or I wind up in the same cluster as this other page, that's the one you want for retrieval and that sort of thing. It is a sort of rel canonical in a way, but not for clustering, just for canonical selection.
As long as the signals align, I guess. If you then use other things like Xdefault to one thing, but then rel canonical to another thing, it's probably confusing signals again, no?
Yes, but that's sort of expected in a way, right? We have to make accommodations for that in this specific case, because you could imagine, say, I have multiple different versions of this Swiss page, and I also have multiple versions of this German page, and I want to rel canonical those guys into their own independent clusters, but then I also want them to be a member of this hreflang map.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah. No, this is a complicated subject, which is, why, when I started, it's like, it depends. This is complicated. There's an iceberg. We're now starting to descend. Now you can start to feel the joy of dealing with localization mechanics.
Oh boy.
Do you think there'll be a simpler variation to do localization at some point? I remember, at some point, Gary and I sat down, we discussed options, and then my simpler solution was to use a set of regular expressions. And then I realized this is not the wrong direction.
a set of regular expressions, and you call that a simpler mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this topic has been one that I've been hearing about since I joined the company. And good ideas in the space have been hard to come by, which is why we're kind of running with the best we've got right now. So, you're rolling your eyes and you're nodding your heads and saying, "Oh God, this is a mess." And yes, it kind of is, but we don't have better solutions. And in the meantime, things have just been a mess anyway. So why not just run with something that is at least slightly better than the status quo? Is kind of where I'm hoping to go.
I mean, some of the more advanced folks that are working on these kind of international sites, they kind of understand what to watch out for, what to do.
And for those of you out there who are wondering, what are we talking about and what is this internationalization? We did discuss this, Gary and I, in episode 78 of this podcast. We're going to link that in the description below as well, so that you can listen up on internationalization and joy and fun. But oh boy, it's an iceberg. I see that. Yeah, I can see that. But that's not the only thing that you do in clustering, dealing with localization. I guess you have other fantastic icebergs, such as error pages you mentioned.
Okay. So this is. Can I start by threatening people with marauding black holes?
What?
Error pages and clustering have an unfortunate relationship where undetected error pages just get a checksum like any other page would, and then cluster by checksum. And so error pages tend to cluster with each other. That makes sense at this point, right?
Oh, is that these cases where you have like a website that has, I don't know, like 20 products that are no longer available, and they have like replaced it with this item is no longer available, and it's kind of an error page, but it doesn't serve as an error page because it serves as a HTTP 200. But then the content is all the same, so the checksums will be all the same, and then weird things happen, right?
So that's a good example. Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, in that case, the webmaster might not be too concerned because these products, if they're permanently gone, then they want them gone. So it's not a big deal. Now, if they're temporarily gone, though, this is a problem because now they've all been sucked into this cluster. They're probably not coming back out because crawl really doesn't like dupes. They're like, "Oh, that page is a dupe. Forget it. I never need to crawl it again." So that's why it's a black hole. Only the things that are very towards the top of the cluster are likely to get back out. And this is where this really worries me is sites with transient errors. Like what you're describing there is sort of like an intentional transient error. But let's say that you've got 3 nines reliability.
Oh no.
Well, 1 out of every 1,000 times you're going to serve us your error, and now you've got a marauding black hole of dead pages, and it gets worse because you're also serving a bunch of JavaScript dependencies.
JavaScript.
And if those fail to fetch, they might break your render, in which case we'll look at your page and we'll think it's broken. So the actual reliability of your page after it's gone through those steps is not necessarily very high.
Yep.
So we have to worry a lot about getting these kinds of marauding black hole clusters from taking over a site because stuff just gets dumped in them. Like there were social media sites where I would look at the most prominent profiles, and they would just have reams of pages underneath them, some of them fairly high profile themselves, that just did not belong in that cluster.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. I've seen something like that when someone was A/B testing a new version of their website, and then certain links would break with error messages because the API had changed and like the calls no longer worked or something like that. And then in like 10% of the cases, you would get like an error message for pretty much all of their content. And getting back out of that was tricky, I guess.
Yeah.
I've also seen something that I assume is similar to this, where if a site has some kind of a CDN in front of it, where the CDN does some kind of bot detection or DDoS detection, and then serves something like, it's like, it looks like you're a bot, and Googlebot is, yes, I'm a bot. But then all of those pages, I guess, end up being clustered together and probably across multiple sites, right?
Yes, basically. Gary has actually been doing some outreach for us on this subject. We come across instances like this, and we do try to get providers of these sorts of services to work with us, or well, at least work with Gary. I don't know what he does with them. He's in charge of that, but not all of them are as cooperative. So that's something to be aware of.
And I guess sites would notice this in Search Console when it says like Google picked a different canonical, and then they look at it and it's like, this is a totally unrelated page. How does Google come up with this idea?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that's leading to that. Yes.
But what do I do? So this black hole sounds really scary, especially if you say like, oh, it's really hard to get out of it again. If it happens for whatever reason, or if I'm launching a new website or a new revamp of a website or a new version of a website, how can I, as the SEO on that website, make sure, or what do I need to look out for to avoid this black hole?
The easiest way is to serve correct HTTP codes. So, send us a 404 or a 403 or a 503. And if you do that, you're not going to cluster. We can only cluster pages that serve a 200.
Oh.
Only 200s go into black holes.
Okay.
That's a good statement. I like that. That's a pretty good one. Only 200 goes into the black hole.
The other option here is if you are doing JavaScript foo, in which case you might not be able to send us an HTTP code. Might be a little too late for that. What you can do there is you can attempt to serve us an actual error message, something that is very discernibly an error. Like, you could literally just say, 503, we encountered a server error, or 403, you were not authorized to view this, or 404, we could not find the correct file. Any of those things would work.
Yep.
You don't even need to use HTTP code, obviously. You could just say something. We have a system that's supposed to detect error pages, and we want to improve its recall beyond what it currently does to try to tackle some of these bad renders and these bot served pages type things. But in the meantime, it's generally safest to take things into your own hands and try to make sure that Google understands your intent as well as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think externally we call these software 404 pages.
Yep.
Okay.
And internally we sometimes call them crypto 404.
Yeah, that's the term I'm more used to. Yes.
Okay.
Quick question. I usually recommend in this case, so we do have like client-side rendered or single-page applications where we have this problem that you can't change the HTTP status code, but you could use JavaScript to redirect to a page that is statically set to return a 404 or 500 or whatever it is. Would that also avoid this clustering issue?
I think so, yes. Trawler usually straps those redirects together for us at indexing time, so we would effectively see your page as the HTTP result at the end of the chain.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the other option we sometimes tell people is to use a no index on a page that basically says 404. Does that make sense? I guess if it's a page that is supposed to be permanently gone, then it would be clustered with others.
So, yeah. So, from my perspective, if you service a no index, that's very different from serving an HTTP error code. If you service an HTTP error code, what actually happens is we'll say, oh, this page suddenly went error, but maybe it isn't supposed to be. So we give you a bit of a grace period before we remove you from the index. If you service a no index, we're like, oh, they went no index. Get it out. Remove this. We can't serve it. So you're gone.
Okay. There's a different urgency to these two things. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I would suggest not necessarily serving no indexes on error pages unless you really want us to remove that page. If it's permanently an error, then go ahead, no index it all you like.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's temporarily an error, no.
Interesting.
Okay, so those are things where the content is clearly like an error or has malfunctioned in some way, and then we get an error. But what about things where we just make mistakes? Like what happens if I accidentally cluster a bunch of near duplicates into a canonical situation and then realize, oh no, I didn't want that. Can I undo that? Like if I fix my rel canonicals after things have been clustered, is that another black hole kind of situation? Or are you like, oh, okay, yeah, that one signal has been fixed?
I kind of want to punt you over to the crawl team on this one.
Okay.
The problem with this is that it's very much on crawl to decide when to crawl things. And I believe that webmasters do have some recourse here. They can request crawl to some extent. And I don't know how effective that would be in these cases because I'm not part of the team that schedules crawl. So I can't tell you how much they actually listen to that feed. I think they do somewhat, but
it's not a Dupes problem.
Well, I mean, all of these problems are related. Like we actually do send rel canonical, for example, is actually a bit of a crawl signal. Like we'll try to get crawl to pick up a rel canonical target if it hasn't been crawled before. So we do talk to them. We do communicate with them for some cases where we're like, hey, this is a thing you should look at. But we don't have any code that says, hey, wake up and inspect these dupes pages because we don't know unless they crawl them that their signals have changed.
Oh, of course. It's kind of like if it's blocked by robots text, like how can we tell what you changed on your page? We don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So we should have a podcast with someone from the crawl team, Markin.
Oh, okay. Noted. Yes. All right. If you have any questions to the crawl team, please let us know in the comments. We are really looking forward to hear if people would like us to talk a little more about crawling with the crawl team. That's an interesting one. Cool. But other things can go wrong as well. I mean, we talked about X default and localization being an iceberg. I mean, I could imagine accidentally serving some different language than you actually specify in the hreflang setup. So if I have like the German version that accidentally, for whatever reasons, pulls data from, I don't know, the Spanish version, does that tinker or collide with clustering as well? Or do you just go like, okay, they signal this is the language version X and we don't care? Or how does that work? Is that a different team as well?
One of the parts of the localization iceberg is that there are multiple teams. This is a problem that crosses the stack.
Oh boy.
What you're describing there, to be honest, I'm not sure I completely followed the example, but mislabeling your content is not something that the dupe system worries too much about in terms of languages. So from my perspective, we probably didn't even notice that happened. It might be more interesting to ask that question to like someone from serving, but I don't have a good answer for that.
All right. Okay. Serving also goes on the list.
We will find someone.
I'm just giving you all sorts of other people to interview at this point.
Well, this is useful.
That's fantastic. This is fine. This is perfectly fine.
Luckily, you already interviewed Zoe for rendering, so you don't need to worry about that one.
That is true, and I actually work with Zoe quite a bit because we have all sorts of interesting edge cases and problems, and I'm pretty sure there's edge cases for you in clustering as well. What is like a really interesting edge case that you encountered?
For clustering?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so given the likely audience here, the one that's probably most interesting for them would be when I see people who put junk into the rel canonical field. So like sometimes it's a script gone wrong and you can see that, oh, there was supposed to be some sort of variable evaluation that didn't happen. So you see like $ variable name or something. And then so all the rel canonicals on the site are suddenly pointing to host name / variable. Or in another case, I've seen people just leave the field empty, and that has a meaning.
Oh,
Wait. What does that mean?
So I think the parser actually turns it into just a /.
Oh,
like it's a relative. It should be a relative path, but I think it actually goes down to like the root of the server. So it's basically the same as saying, please wipe my site out.
Okay.
You have to be really careful. So I should be clear here. We have some validation in place to try to break rel canonicals when we think they're wrong. But this is another iceberg. Like we have a very old feature that is essentially being leaned on to do this. And the new feature that we would like to use to do it has been in development for years at this point. So are we ever going to have good rel canonical validation? I don't know. But in the meantime, the one we've got is imperfect. And if you make mistakes, we'll catch some of them and we'll let some of them through.
I think the solution is to use an LLM. We just ask Bard, like, given this HTML header, what do you think?
John.
I'm really curious what it would say.
Maybe it would start to cry, Martin.
Yeah, sit in the corner and cry. That's the apt response. Oh my god. Okay, that's bananas. All right, so there's a lot going on in dupes and clustering. I think that's really really interesting, and I think the one takeaway that you can probably take out of this as a website owner is make sure that every signal points in the right direction. Like if you want one specific URL to be like showing up in search results, then make sure that we can understand, okay, this is this specific version, this is the best candidate for this cluster of URLs pointing to the exact same content or near duplicated content. I guess that's the biggest takeaway. Is that, or what would you say people should take away from it?
And also HTTP status codes, I think.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So just to follow up, there is actually a fairly authoritative external list on what webmaster signals we use in canonical selection. I actually looked it over recently, and it's still basically up to date. I think the one thing that might be missing from it is xlang default is now kind of important, but the rest of them, like sitemaps 301, rel canonical, they're all there.
Cool. That's in our documentation. So we should update that. Maybe it'll be ready by the time this episode comes out. Cool.
So if you see a documentation update done recently, then you know, yes, that has happened. Awesome. That's really, really exciting. Okay, that was super interesting. Allan, thank you so much. That was really, really good.
You're welcome.
And thanks, John, for being here with me. I think that's it for our episode, huh?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I think next time on Search of the Record, we will be reflecting about the year in search already. The end of the year is coming closer, huh?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Already.
Okay. Before we get stressed about the fact that the year is ending, I'd like to say, again, thanks, Allan, for being here. Thanks, John, for being here. And thanks, everyone out there, for listening in. With that, I'd like to say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
We've been having fun with these podcast episodes. I hope you, the listener, have found them both entertaining and insightful too. Feel free to drop us a note on LinkedIn or chat with us at one of our next events we go to. If you have any thoughts, let us know. And of course, do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.